Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the IIA Cochin Center, it is my great pleasure to introduce architect Robert Verrijt from Architecture Brio, a leading architecture firm renowned for their innovative and contextually sensitive design solutions. Founded in 2006 by architect Robert Verrijt and architect Shefali Balwani, Architecture Brio operates from offices in Rotterdam and Mumbai. They excel in creating spaces that are both distinctive and harmonious with their natural surroundings, addressing the challenges of urbanization, climate, and cultural diversity. Their projects span worldwide, including India, Malaysia, Switzerland, the Philippines, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Their commitment to social impact is exemplified through their collaboration with Billion Bricks, an initiative dedicated to eradicating homelessness. Additionally, they actively engage in academic collaborations and research, regularly giving lectures at prestigious institutions in India and abroad. They are also involved in the Bandra Collective, a group focused on improving public spaces in their local community. Architecture Brio has received numerous national and international awards, including the Best Practice in India Award at the Trends Excellence Awards. They have also been honored with the NDTV Home Design of the Year Award, the JK Architecture of the Year Award, and have been featured on the AD 100 list by Architectural Digest India as one of the most influential designers in India and South Asia. Their projects, such as House on a Stream and Casa Brio, have won multiple awards, and their collaborative project, Billion Bricks Homes, has received high accolades at the regional and global Wholesome Awards for Sustainable Construction. Please join me in welcoming architect Robert Verrijt to the stage.
Thank you very much, IIA Kochi, for inviting me to speak here today. I've been a few times to Kochi already, and it's always wonderful to be back here. Today I would like to talk about nostalgia. I hope you can all hear me clearly. Yeah? It's good? Because I would like to talk about nostalgia because what I find interesting about architecture is that it hinges on two things. It is an optimistic profession that always looks forward with the promise of a better future. But it is also rooted in our understanding of the past. A past which is always better, of course. Making mixtapes is much better than Spotify, right? The idea of nostalgia is therefore often misused by politicians that promise a future that returns to the good old times. In India, one, for example, laments about a past before the Mughal or British invaders, a past before globalization, or a past before climate change. Of course, this ideal past did not actually exist, and nor will it exist in the future. Today I would like to speak about an alternative future though, a future which, as Svetlana Boym once said, dwells on the ambivalences of human longing and belonging, and does not shy away from the contradictions of modernity. I will speak about 6, maybe 7 projects, if we've got the time for it, that all in some way question this idea of nostalgia as a glorious homeland or past that you can actually return to. But before I proceed, I'd like to talk a little bit about our roots. I grew up here in this tiny little village called Mareze in the Netherlands. That's interesting, there's a little bit of a link between previous speakers and Kochi, of course. And then I went on to study in Delft at the architecture school. This was during the time and the era that maybe you all know as super Dutch architecture. It was an interesting period because architecture started questioning conventional briefs and programs. and propose alternatives. By layering and recomposing program in different ways, new typologies emerged that were either commentaries on society or proposed alternative futures. It actually had the ambition to deal with some of the critical challenges of the time. However, the strong emphasis on the clarity of the concept also resulted in a kind of loss of the experiential and the physical quality of architecture. Architecture lost its relation to the process of making. A building rather resembled exactly what this, like a blue foam model looked like, made in the model studio, then emerging out of how you actually build, the logic of constructing. And architecture demanded attention to itself. The ambition of architecture was to become a spectacle with the clear intent to be new, to not be like anything else, to be detached from history and context. An a-nostalgic architecture, you could say. Did I escape the Netherlands? Well, I wouldn't say it was an escape, but it was certainly a sort of a quest for a different kind of inspiration that led me elsewhere. An exchange program led me actually to CEPT in India, the university founded by Pritzker Prize-winning architect B.V. Doshi, where also Shefali, my partner, graduated from. And while in Delft as a student, you were kind of left alone to chart out your own paths and explore your own interests among a multitude of viewpoints. In CEPT, the direct teacher-student experience prevailed. It was a tranquil garden of ideas where you learned from your gurus. Here, an architecture was taught that was contextually spirited, environmentally informed, structuralist and modernist at heart. But it was also a place that was on the edge of being dogmatic due to this close-knit teaching and learning culture. In our quest for architecture that whispered rather than shouted, that sought continuity instead of attention, our journey led us to Sri Lanka. There, in the studio of Channa Daswata, we immersed ourselves in the world of Geoffrey Bawa. Bawa's genius lay in a paradox. He didn't impose on nature, he let nature dictate. The wild beauty of Sri Lanka became the muse, shaping his designs and concepts, and eventually, literally, overtaking the buildings. Close study revealed the deceptive simplicity of Bawa's creations. What seemed effortlessly natural were in fact a product of meticulous interventions. Now take the Kandalama Hotel, for example. It's a masterpiece playing the disappearing act. Behind the lush greenery lay actually an intensive utilitarian scheme. Its columns and its beams anchored violently into the rock surfaces of the surrounding forest. And the architecture did twist and turn here and there to accommodate itself to nature, but in no way did nature, although helped along its way by the human hands, stop doing what it does best: adapt, evolve, improvise, and surprise. The Lunuganga Garden is, of course, one of the highlights in Bawa's oeuvre. More so because it's not about buildings here. The garden is about light and skill, proportion, and the passage of time. So while it's not about buildings, it actually does say a lot about architecture. Imagine our surprise during one of our visits when a heavy downpour turned this checkerboard hardscape into a submerged masterpiece. Lake, garden, and architecture now, even though temporarily, harmoniously collapsed into one. Bauer did not subjugate nature to the will of man, but in a way he transformed our experience of nature. To contrast, he highlighted the rawness and the unpredictability of nature. Bauer's fascination with laying down geometries into the landscape resonated those inside the estate bungalow. Geoffrey Bauer seemed to us to be a rather sentimental and nostalgic character, a person who seemed to long for a world long lost, perhaps someone with a nostalgic yearning for an unburdened childhood, or at least a sanitized version of it, running around in the wilderness of the estate of his family. Or, as Lunoganga so cleverly evokes, a wistful longing for a romantic could have been. The possibility of other homes on other shores. Bauer actually nearly settled down in a villa on the Garda Lake in Italy before returning home to Sri Lanka. And if he would have done that, we would have not seen his incredible oeuvre come to life ever. Early on in our career, we experienced firsthand two extreme positions in architecture. The architecture of the spectacle and the architecture of modesty. But also the architecture of the new and the architecture of nostalgia. It was then the time to chart our own paths. In 2006, we moved here to Mumbai to start our own practice. We were looking to practice prioritizing context in building form, which we appreciated so much in Sri Lanka, but the world was changing, urging us to explore alternative approaches rooted in conceptual thinking. Today, our office houses around 30 to 35 architects in Mumbai and in Rotterdam. The diversity of conditions we face, from Europe to Asia, demands constant adaptation. While a place like, for example, the Netherlands, here you see a picture of the place where we live, Rotterdam, has so far been spared of the reality of the globalized world, with its increasing peaks and valleys of wealth concentration. In India, we deal with extremes in the economic status of our clients. This makes you constantly have to adapt, switch positions, and negotiate. Exposing yourself to diverse situations gives you the opportunity to build relationships and kind of weave stories between them. It makes you flexible, and it makes you agile. We navigate extremes from finding solutions for entire homes for the homeless to, with the same budget, like for example this house, selecting a luxurious marble lot for a bathroom for one of our affluent clients. The first project we designed independently was embedded deeply in this disparate world full of extremes. And it started with a story that germinated on a playground. It was Matthew Spacey, who had been living in Mumbai for a while, but was struck by the lack of places to play for children. And he started out with some ad hoc rugby classes, sports coaching and mentoring. But soon this expanded to programs taking kids in a bus out into the wilderness around Mumbai. Here he helped children who had grown up in the slums and had not seen anything else in their life reconnect with the natural world. Through these programs, the boys and girls learned discipline, improved self-esteem, hygiene, and the benefits of working in a team together in a healthy, competitive environment. After a few years, the organization built an outdoor learning campus, then with architect Rahul Malhotra, a 14-acre site with climbing equipment, zip lines, and Jacob ladders. But during the hot summers and the rainy monsoon months, there was a need for more shaded places where the children could play and learn. What we designed was a composite of two programs, partly a building, partly a challenging course, and kind of an interactive building used as a gathering space and a play area. And we located the learning pavilion over here on a confluence of 4 distinct landscape elements. On the confluence of a small hill, a stream on the right, a play field at the bottom, and the river on the top. We emphasize on these elements by strategically placing the various activities of the learning pavilion on either side of the banks of the stream that runs through the center. The roof straddles across these different landscapes, tying them together. The learning pavilion is a building with the purpose of, in abstract terms, educating children about overcoming challenges in life, overcoming boundaries. And in that sense, it's actually a kind of an extension of the existing challenge course on the campus. Children actually learn to work with each other in teams to achieve goals. The space below the roof is open to all sides. In the summer months, the shade of the roof creates a respite from the heat. A natural breeze flows from the river and cools the covered spaces. And during the monsoon months, the pavilion becomes a dry haven to take cover from the heavy rains, and the stream below becomes alive. Often children's play spaces are associated with very bright colors. But here we wanted to emphasize on the experience of the natural environment. The classroom becomes the outdoors, and nature becomes the classroom. Most of our projects are located in very unique natural landscapes. Because of rapid urbanization, our sense of isolation from and a loss of the natural world grows. And simultaneously, our desire for a place away from the life in the city increases. People have an inherent yearning to retreat to those undisturbed parts of the planet in order to restore this sense of loss. But how do we build in pristine natural landscapes? There's a dilemma that every architect faces when starting work on a new site. Should one not leave the site alone? Why touch it? Why spoil it? The problem with this, though, is that if we believe, as William Cronon puts it in The Trouble with Wilderness, that nature is where we as human beings are not, then we also give ourselves the permission to evade the responsibilities for the lives that we actually lead in our everyday urban environments. If we designate the wild places as sacred, we in effect also say that our backyards, our roadside trees, our neighborhood parks are not valuable. I would like to step back for a minute and elaborate a bit more in detail what we mean when we use the words nature and landscape. Firstly, I would like to establish that when we say nature, it is not actually what you would presume it to be, raw, untouched nature. In fact, as Simon Sharma elaborates in his book Landscape and Memory, there's no word for raw, untouched, unseen nature. It actually doesn't exist. It does not and it cannot exist. Because as soon as the human eye lays its eyes on it, that which is raw is immediately transformed to a landscape, framed and well as in a painting in a museum. One could actually say that nature is as ephemeral as Eurydice. Seeing nature implies and immediately implies actually that it vanishes, it becomes cultured, and it becomes created. Landscapes are actually culture before they are nature. They are constructs of the imaginations projected onto wood and water and rock. What you see with your eyes is defined by what your parents, your great-grandparents, or romantic poets in the 18th century, and even the first Homo sapiens, planting a seed and starting the agricultural revolution, what they saw in nature. Their fears and their adoration of the sublime and their greed, that is what filters your gaze. Still, however, we are attracted to those pockets of landscapes that seem close to what we imagine wilderness would have looked like. We desire to experience those places that we imagine we experienced in our childhood once more. We want to relive those feelings, even though they are derived out of a sort of clouded memory of wholeness, of something that actually never existed. This here is a place not far from the metropolitan area of Mumbai. And you can see from the hills numerous rivers and streams find their way down through an undulating landscape, eventually feeding into the Bombay Bay. And our clients wanted to build a home here. They were not the first, and they certainly would not be the last. And with this landscape slowly filling up with self-important villas, they would easily actually become a part of the problem. And we asked ourselves, will we be able to create different relationships between new settlers and the rural landscape? How do we intervene in this landscape, the home of farmers for over centuries, but now the playground of urban citizens? Can the building be made barely visible? Here, the roof of the house settles just below the top of the hillock, camouflaging itself in the silhouette of the undulating landscape, but also sitting just high enough to be able to measure oneself against the vastness of the landscape, the winding river and mountain range over there in the distance. This house near Mumbai is a combination of several typologies. It is an underground house, a courtyard house, a veranda house, and it's a sort of a lookout post. And what you see, gazing down from the top of the hill, is just a cover of green. Now, of course, it all looks very natural, as if it's always been like this. You see here a courtyard in the center that forges a connection with the roof and travels through the interior of the house, extending past the pool onto the landscape, and then tying together the terrain and the architecture through an experiential movement. Here you see it in plan. The sequence of a rock-carved courtyard, kitchen, dining room, veranda, screen, then the deck, the pool, and then the riparian landscape beyond. It's an experiential one, but it also acts as a sort of an instrument to measure oneself against the vastness of space. The climate here is unforgiving. Apart from the very short winter, it's either scorching hot and dry, or the rain drops down from the sky with tremendous destructive power. The natural landscape then changes from a dense, brightly green-colored, jungle-like forest during these monsoon months to a pale-brown shrubbery wasteland during the summer months. Our landscape design helped, through the plantation of drought-tolerant fountain grasses, to mitigate this transition throughout the seasons and a seamless transition to the surrounding river landscape. The veranda is, of course, a very essential element of life in this kind of climate. The bamboo screens act as a sort of a filter for privacy and for light. The building is made to age and weather. There's kind of something sublime in this dramatic collision between the order of geometry and the unpredictability of nature. And then at the intersection of both, it choreographs ruinification or decay. It meditates upon the inevitability of time and the forces of nature, and it indulges in this bittersweet sensation within which one can find both joy and comfort. The character of this house, the house on a stream, is very different. This is designed around a stream that is the protagonist, around which everything revolves. By breaking up the house into two parts and placing them on either sides of the banks, the stream becomes omnipresent. And the bridge and the pergola that connects the two buildings stimulates, even kind of forces the users to move out of the comfort of the interior and experience the outside several times during the day. It kind of makes you live more in the moment. Tennessee Williams said about this, "Life is all memory, except for that one present moment that goes by so quick that you hardly catch it going." And I found that a really beautiful phrase. The pool here acts as an extension of the stream, but in the summer months, when the stream dries up, it's a substitute for it. Now, the outside and the inside shell of the building are distinctly different. And the internal spaces are defined with volumes created by the changing thickness of the internal ceiling. It's what we call poché. It kind of describes the space inside the walls and the ceilings, the space between the inner and the outer shell. And here it is part of the drawing technique as well. The exterior responds to the side elements of the existing trees and the streams, while the interiors have their own logic. Near the plan, you can see spaces, they overlap, and there's a constant shift in symmetries that contribute to a dynamic spatial experience of discovery. You have the heaviness of the exterior concrete mass that is reversed by the lightness of the white-washed walls and the ceilings. And then we have large sliding doors which span from floor to ceiling and wall to wall that bring the inside and the outside together. Architecture is kind of delicately balancing on a reduced footprint as the found boulder in the landscape. Here in the dreamlike landscape of Hampi in South India. And it is kind of solid and timeless due to its almost bunker-like character. Perhaps a bit daunting. But as architecture critic Matus once said, who wrote a lot about brutalist buildings, who says buildings should be pretty, reassuring, and unthreatening? We don't expect paintings, novels, or films to be pretty. So why should buildings be? The homogeneous materialization emphasizes the sculptural quality of the house that is molding itself about the site. And by lifting the tips of the wings off the ground, the relationship with the landscape is paradoxically strengthened. Here, the contradiction between architecture and nature is actually highlighted. The pleasure of the building does not lie in the denial, but rather in the celebration of the collision of the two. Of all projects I'm going to share today, I would say this is the most reflectively nostalgic. It recognizes the contradictions of our contemporary world, and while it recognizes that we feel increasingly alienated from the natural world, it also recognizes that we desire, in a positive sense, for permanence and for belonging. Concrete, a material that is solidified, shaped by the textures of its contraform, has a beautiful, poetic quality. But building with it also, in a way, felt like a sin. The high embodied energy of concrete is certainly not sustainable. And building our first house with this material made us more acutely aware of some of the challenges in India. Raw materials for basic construction are increasingly harder to procure. The shortage of construction sand leads to undesirable practices like here, just outside of Mumbai, where it is being mined at the bottom of creeks and rivers, or causing coastline erosions on the mined beaches again around Mumbai. Construction with bricks causes the topsoil of fertile farmlands to disappear and causes emissions of black carbon polluting the air. Our work is not defined by a singular preference of materials. We live in an age of scarcity, a depletion of material resources and skilled labor. And therefore, a search for alternative materials led us to experimenting with bamboo. Like in the screen in the riparian house we just saw in a previous project. And now in the artist retreat in Mumbai. In this project, there was one more major concern. The coastal nature of the site meant that due to impending sea level rise, we had to consider building on a land that may actually not exist in the near future. So we started researching how we could build in climate resilience. How we could use building materials that have less impact on the fragile ecosystems, as well as are future ready and could accommodate rising sea levels. This picture you actually see what happens every monsoon, and this worsens every year. The plan is actually quite simple of this building. It is 2 rooms that are defined merely by rows of columns and 2 chopped off pyramid-shaped roofs, with then 2 skylights that are shifted away from each other that define these 2 spaces experientially. The typology of this building is loosely based on the Ambalama in Sri Lanka. According to me, it's one of the most beautiful, and it sounds grand, but it's one of the most beautiful public infrastructure projects of the early 19th century. It is sited on a modest rock outcrop, an island amongst a sea of paddy fields, and pilgrims, traders, and travelers from all over South Asia gathered here to rest, meet, and share stories with each other. The structure delicately balances on 4 boulders of around 1 meter in size. And then the height of the boulders carefully levels the difference between the slope of the rock surface and then the horizontal plane. 4 large rectangular-shaped tree trunks overlay like puzzle pieces into each other to form the support for the superstructure, as well as functions as beautiful benches to sit or sleep on. Space, functionality, tectonics, materialization, and structural essence all converge here. Heavy and down to earth, but transparent and light at the same time. While in our project the stilts, columns and beams are made in galvanized steel, the roof structure is built of bamboo V-shaped rafters, which are covered by a lightweight sandwich roof. A solar skylight on the top of the roof pulls up the hot air from the space below, encouraging a natural flow of air and draft across the workshops. These skylights, they bring in light, but it also, of course, generates power. And the otherwise distracting solar panels are subtly integrated into the roof design. You see here these bolted connections. And the structure is placed on these large stone boulders that we actually found from a site nearby from another project of ours, and they form the foundation of the structure. Now, bamboo is a wonder material, but it also frustrates a lot of architects. is never straight. And what do architects not like anything more than a perfectly straight line, right? It varies in diameter between either ends of the poles. And I'm showing this image from the type of bamboo we get in the local market in Mumbai, because bamboo construction is still at a very nascent stage here. And importing and transporting bamboo from, let's say, Indonesia would have eliminated all these environmental benefits of a bio-based carbon-absorbing materials. So we may do with these crooked, uneven bamboos that we got locally. And we designed this diagonal zigzag layout of the rafters to avoid the irregularity of the bamboos from becoming destructive. But also the benefit is that it becomes a stronger structural frame. On the right you see here a detail of how the bamboo is actually tied to the cement board shell. And here you see how the whole structure comes together. And here you see how the light throughout the day and night changes. This is a project we finished, probably about 3 years ago. Now, every site has a story. And sometimes it is millions of years old. The formation of the Himalayas took place 50 million years ago, when the Indian subcontinent broke away from a large landmass and then reached Eurasia after a slow journey upwards. And then, with magnificent force, it lifted up the ocean seabed, exposing layers of a medium grain, metamorphic rock that originated actually from the mud of the bottom of the ocean. Can you imagine that this was the ocean once? Now you find these rock formations everywhere near the site, and it felt therefore very natural to have these become the basic component of the project. This is actually a picture of a sample wall that we created for the project. It was actually not a choice that made our lives easy. Here you can see a few old men that slowly but patiently work on the stonemasonry. First, the stone is quarried from the site itself, from the foundation on which the building is placed, and they are then shaped into somewhat regular blocks. And then they are positioned with a mud-lime mix into place. Finally, the finishing and the alignment is done on the wall itself. Most men that worked here are over 50 years old, because the art of masonry has slowly disappeared. And of course, most young men, what you see happening across India, have abandoned this trade and moved to the city. And even though it is unintended, this material does evoke a sense of nostalgia, since it won't be long for this method of construction becoming completely obsolete. Here, on top of one of the roofs, the mason is chipping on a stone coping. What a workplace, right? Now, this is the building tradition in this region. It's made of load-bearing stone masonry walls and a standing seam iron roofing, the latter introduced by the British. It is not nostalgia, though, that drove our choice of materials. It is not a longing for a sort of a sanitized impression of the past. It's also not a celebration of the crafts. We are very much aware of this trap of fetishizing craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is actually often romanticized, not only for its supposed superior quality, but because it makes a product exclusive. And this exclusionary quality is also why it loses the potential for positive impacts. But then when you have the choice of sculpting a building out of the rock on which it is founded, instead of having to cart up truckloads of sand, cement and gravel from the foothills, which is really a painful, bumpy steep 5-hour road trip uphill, and believe me, I've done it many times. It is just plain common sense. The irony is that while Western consumers aspire to craftsmanship, the majority of the world's population, though, like in India, lives in countries that have local craftsmen but aspire to industrialize products. The stone elements of the retreat seem to be a sort of an extension of the terracing of the Himalayan agricultural terrain, merely protected and made habitable by a light, horizontal roof plane. And here it becomes kind of difficult to perceive where architecture stops and landscape elements take over. Just a sip of water. From one pavilion to another, you walk through a garden. And with the roof emphasizing this panoramic views of the Himalayas. A path takes you kind of inside the earth, inside the womb of the earth, to then appear on the other side of the solarium-like pavilion that reflects the fruit orchid in its sort of faceted, curved glass. The timber roofs are finished in a standing seam copper roof. And here you see the copper roof sheets that come on large rolls being folded. And they are then laid in between clips that are screwed into the roof. And then with simple hand tools, the seams are folded by this South Indian craftsman. And then the edges are turned in a separate piece to protect the end grain of the wood. It's beautiful craftsmanship, but it's not local craftsmanship. The timber structure was made with the Himalayan pine by a local carpenter, but using German screw technology. The copper came from Sweden, and it was installed by the South Indian team and this French specialist here on the roof. And although it may appear so, this project is not a continuation of a local building tradition. The carpenter, for example, had never made a roof with these kinds of spans and with this kind of connection technology. And the standing seam technology that was introduced by the British was much more primitive at the time. I think this kind of causes us to reevaluate and redefine what local and traditional means and what our valuation of it is and how we use these words in our architectural profession. While for the inhabitants of Uttarakhand, owning a concrete frame house has become aspirational, this retreat acts as a kind of resistance. It offers a critique of both the modern fascination with newness and the no less modern reinvention of tradition. In the off-modern tradition, reflection and longing, estrangement and affection go together. We were acutely aware that this was going to be the first house that was going to be built on this hill. And of course, this came with some responsibility. It was very special that we were so close to the mega city of Mumbai, and that for the millions of years since the existence of humankind, nobody had ever settled down here. But it didn't mean that a house had to pretend that it wasn't there. Rather than shying away from its presence, the house could also show confidence and yet be respectful of the stunning landscape. The slopes are steep here, which was really quite challenging. And to make the land habitable, we had to create terraces. So we inscribed these terraces into the land and carved out a hook-shaped retaining wall. From the outset, we imagined the house as if we found an old ruin, a sort of like a few old solid stone walls, aged and overgrown, left and abandoned, topped up with just a light pavilion. And we also left these basalt rock formations exposed as a long-lost memory to around 65 million years ago, when the Indian subcontinent, that hadn't reached Eurasia yet then, but was drifting across the ocean, and this place was actually full of volcanoes. Of course, that's why the basalt is there. The site looks over a beautiful bay, as the Portuguese would have called it, Bombaia. On the foreground, patches of paddy fields, a sweeping coastline, the clouds reflected in the quiet bay, a hill in the background, and a long line of skyscrapers huddled over there on the horizon, which is Bombay. But we kind of wanted to avoid this concept of creating a mega panorama to which our era seems to aspire so much, and replace it by something much more subtle, much more rich. Instead of a panoramic house, like perhaps the Himalayan one that I showed you before, we designed two telescopic pavilions pointed with their most narrow sides towards the view. Perhaps a little intuitive. But this allowed us to create a myriad of micro panoramas, one for each season of the year and each hour of the day. It's actually an instrument from which to experience the landscape in different ways. Instead of revealing the panoramic view immediately, the house delays. It teases with glimpses till only at the end, when you reach the pool veranda, and then you look over the sinuous pool that is reflecting the bay in the distance. Now, according to me, a good house is one which has a clear organization. But a great house is one where you can actually get lost. Here you can wander around, each time discovering a new way to get from one place to another, through tunnels, secret passages underground that come and enter into different places. The house is understood as one in which inside and outside identities are interchangeable to the point that the differences are cancelled out. When the doors of the house are open, it is possible to enter and exit continually and turn into the exterior what yesterday was the interior, or the other way around. The path of movement becomes a spider webs or a labyrinth. In a holiday home like this, it is important that you are able to get lost. You should be able to lose yourself in order to generate memories. And years later, like with all great holiday destinations that you visit repeatedly, you only remember the feeling of being on holiday. And all holidays eventually merge into one. I would like to enter with, finish this presentation with one last little movie clip of actually our last project that we just finished a few months ago. And this movie just came to us, so I'm really happy to share it. It's again a very different kind of building from what we've designed before. It's a very quiet building, a very calm building that sort of creates a serene ambient environment. The exterior is made out of a sand-faced plaster with slightly curved elevational undulations. And as you can see here, the sun touches this building and creates an ever-changing pattern of light and shadow. It becomes a sort of a sundial from which if you have lived in this house for a few years, you know exactly what day of the year, what time, hour of the day it is. Light reflects off in different ways from the pool onto the walls and onto ceilings. And in the long corridors and passages of this sort of myriad of rooms, you see the shadow patterns changing. There's a very simple material palette of the sand-faced plaster, a brushed limestone floor, and a green marble sourced from Baroda, but carved beautifully to allow water to stream off over the edges of the pool. This is a staircase leading to the roof, entering into a courtyard with a trough placed in the center that reflects these butterbrush trees into the water surface. You enter through the main house into a courtyard. And then you reach to the other side of the building. We were lucky enough to be able to design almost every aspect of this project, right from this brass pivot door to also the hardware, the lock bodies, the door handles, some of the light fittings. Here you see the library that opens up to the courtyard next to it. And one of the other bespoke pieces of hardware that we designed, the pivot elements. Thank you so much.